Ladies and gentlemen, imagine someone in your life who always wanted to control you, who twisted your feelings to get what they wanted. Now imagine the moment you finally saw through it, the moment you realized you didn't have to bend, explain, or apologize anymore. That moment changes everything. Today, I'm going to reveal what a narcissist does when they see you as too strong to manipulate, the one trick they'll try to pull you back in, and how your strength can turn their games into your freedom. Recognition is power because manipulation only survives in confusion. For a long time, control works quietly, almost invisibly, slipping into everyday conversations, emotional reactions, and unspoken expectations. You may feel drained, unsure, or constantly second guessing yourself without fully understanding why. The moment recognition happens, the moment you name what's really going on, something irreversible shifts. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. Nothing in the room has moved, but now you can see clearly. That clarity alone begins to weaken the grip manipulation once had over you. When you recognize manipulation, you stop internalizing blame that was never yours. You realize that your empathy was being used as leverage, your patience mistaken for permission, and your silence interpreted as surrender. Recognition pulls the fog away and returns responsibility to where it belongs. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "Why does this feel wrong?" That question is powerful because it centers truth over fear. Manipulation thrives on emotional reflexes, not conscious awareness. Once awareness enters the space, control has to work harder, and most of the time, it can't survive at all. Recognition is also power because it restores choice. You no longer react automatically or bend instinctively. You pause, you observe, you decide. That pause may seem small, but it is revolutionary. It's the moment you stop being an emotional resource and start being a self-respecting human being. From that point forward, manipulation loses its invisibility. Even if the other person doesn't change, you have. And that change, quiet, grounded, and deeply personal, is where real power begins. And once that recognition takes root, once the fog lifts and you can no longer be guided by confusion, something else becomes impossible to ignore. Your strength starts to show. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but the kind that no longer asks for permission to exist. And that is when control begins to slip through their fingers. Strength threatens control because manipulation depends on predictability. It needs you doubting, explaining, overgiving, and apologizing for having needs. But when you recognize what's happening, you stop feeding the cycle. You don't react the same way. You don't chase clarity from someone committed to distortion. Your calm becomes unfamiliar. Your boundaries feel like resistance. And suddenly, the person who once felt so powerful feels exposed. This is where the shift becomes emotional for them, not because they've lost you, but because they've lost access to you. Your strength reminds them of what they can't manufacture: self-worth that isn't borrowed, confidence that doesn't require applause, peace that doesn't depend on approval. And instead of respecting that strength, control tries to challenge it. It tests it. It pushes against it, hoping you'll collapse back into the old version of yourself. But here's the truth most people never hear. Your strength isn't the problem. It's the proof. Proof that you've grown beyond emotional dependency. Proof that you no longer need chaos to feel connection. Proof that you are no longer manageable through guilt or fear. And that's why strength feels threatening to someone who survives on control. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're free. You've stopped negotiating your value. You've stopped shrinking to be understood. And in doing so, you've changed the rules of the relationship without saying a word. This is the moment they realize they can't move you the way they used to. And when control no longer works, something else always follows: not growth, not accountability, but a final attempt to reclaim power in a different way. And when that realization hits them, when they understand that control no longer responds to pressure, they don't suddenly become honest or self-aware, they become strategic. This is where the third shift happens, and it often feels the most confusing because it doesn't look like an attack at first. It looks like absence or innocence or heartbreak. When a narcissist sees they can't bend you anymore, they reach for the one trick that doesn't require your permission. They withdraw, they rewrite the story, or they step into the role of the victim. Not because they've been hurt, but because they've lost influence. Silence becomes a tool, distance becomes a message, smears become a substitute for connection. And suddenly, the narrative changes without your consent. You may notice they pull away just enough to make you question yourself. They may tell others a carefully edited version of events where your boundaries become cruelty and their control becomes concern. Or they may appear wounded, fragile, misunderstood, hoping your empathy will override your clarity. This is not emotional honesty. This is emotional leverage. What makes this trick powerful is that it targets your humanity. It pokes at your compassion. It tests whether you'll abandon yourself to prove you're not the villain in a story you didn't write. And for a moment, it can feel destabilizing. You might wonder if your strength caused this, if your growth broke something, if staying silent makes you heartless. But here's the deeper truth. This tactic only appears when manipulation has already failed. They are no longer trying to control your actions, they're trying to control the meaning of your absence. They're trying to punish you for not needing them the way you once did. And if you can hold your ground here, if you can resist explaining yourself to a distorted narrative, you step into a new level of freedom. Because when someone must disappear, distort, or self victimize to regain relevance, it confirms what recognition already taught you. You were never the problem. You were the proof that control doesn't survive consciousness. And once the story is rewritten, once the distance is created and the roles are reversed, the silence begins to stretch. Not the peaceful kind, not the healing kind, but the deliberate, heavy silence meant to echo inside you. This is where many people stumble because silence feels empty, but in manipulation, it is anything but. Their silence is not calm, it is calculated. It's designed to make you fill in the gaps with self doubt, to make you replay conversations, to make you wonder if you misunderstood everything. Silence becomes the last attempt to pull you back into emotional labor without saying a single word. No accusations, no demands, just absence loud enough to disturb your peace. And the reason this works is because you are human. You care, you reflect, you want resolution. They know that. They rely on it. The silence is meant to provoke you into reaching out, explaining yourself again, softening your boundaries just to restore tonal equilibrium. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the control. But something is different now. Recognition has already happened. Strength has already been revealed. And because of that, the silence no longer lands the same way. You may feel it, but you no longer chase it. You begin to understand that silence is only powerful when it's mistaken for truth. When you believe it means guilt, when you assume it means you've done something wrong. In reality, their silence is a response to your clarity. It is the sound of a door closing on manipulation. And instead of rushing to open it, you pause. You listen to what your body already knows. That peace you're protecting, that steadiness you're building, it doesn't need their voice to validate it. This is where growth becomes visible. You stop breaking your own boundaries just to end the quiet. You let the silence pass without filling it with self-betrayal. And in doing so, you learn something powerful. Silence only controls you when you abandon yourself inside it. And you are no longer willing to do that. And as you stop filling the silence, as you stop bending just to restore familiarity, another truth quietly rises to the surface. Your growth, the very thing saving you, is experienced by them as rejection. Not because you turned cold, not because you became unkind, but because you became unavailable for misuse. You didn't leave with slam doors or dramatic exits. You simply grew. You started choosing clarity over chaos, peace over performance, self-respect over survival. And to someone who depended on your emotional flexibility, that feels like abandonment. Even if you never walked away, your healing disrupts the dynamic they relied on. It removes the role they assigned you without asking. This is why they may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of being different now. And they're right, but not in the way they mean it. You didn't change into someone worse. You changed into someone whole. And wholeness doesn't orbit around anyone else's needs. What hurts them isn't the loss of you, it's the loss of access to the version of you that overextended, overexplained, and overgave. The version that stayed quiet to keep the peace. The version that confused endurance with love. Your growth feels like rejection because it exposes a truth they don't want to face. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And here's where many people feel guilt. You may feel selfish for choosing yourself. You may wonder if your boundaries caused pain, but growth will always disappoint those who benefited from your self-abandonment. That doesn't make your growth wrong. It makes it necessary. You are not punishing anyone by evolving. You are simply no longer participating in your own erosion. And while they may frame your healing as cruelty, your nervous system knows better. Your body knows what safety feels like now. And once you understand that your growth is not an attack, but a return to yourself, you stop apologizing for becoming someone manipulation can no longer reach. And once you stop apologizing for your growth, once you stop carrying guilt for becoming healthier, the dynamic shifts again. Because when someone can no longer pull you back with silence or shame, they do something else. They attack what they can't control. They don't go after your strength directly. They go after your boundaries. They question your intentions. They poke at your confidence. They plant seeds of doubt where certainty has started to grow. Not openly, not always aggressively, but subtly, through comments, implications, or stories told about you when you're not in the room. Because if they can't reach you emotionally, they try to destabilize the ground you're standing on. Your boundaries become walls. Your clarity becomes coldness. Your self-respect becomes ego. Why? Because boundaries are proof that you see clearly. And clarity is dangerous to anyone who depends on confusion. They aren't trying to understand you, they're trying to regain leverage. If they can make you question your motives, you might lower your guard. If they can make you doubt your growth, you might reopen doors that were closed for a reason. But this is where your transformation becomes undeniable. Instead of defending yourself, you observe. Instead of explaining, you ground yourself. You recognize the pattern not as a personal failure, but as a predictable response to lost control. You understand that attacks are not about your character, they're about their discomfort. And here's the quiet power in that realization. When someone attacks your boundaries, it means those boundaries are working. When they target your peace, it's because they can't penetrate it. When they try to rewrite who you are, it's because they no longer get to define you. You don't need to fight back to win this moment. You simply need to stay anchored in what you know. Your truth doesn't require defense. Your growth doesn't require permission. And as you stop reacting to the attacks, something remarkable happens. The storm loses its audience, and without an audience, manipulation has nothing left to perform. And when the noise finally quiets, when the attacks don't land, when the silence no longer pulls you back, when the story they tell about you no longer shakes your center, there is only one place left for manipulation to try and survive. It turns inward, it waits, it hopes you'll do the work for it. This is where self-doubt becomes the last chain. Not because they put it there recently, but because it was planted long ago. In moments where you were questioned instead of understood, in times when your feelings were minimized, in patterns where you learned to doubt your instincts to keep the peace. Manipulation doesn't need to speak anymore if self-doubt starts whispering on its behalf. You may catch yourself wondering if you overreacted, if you were unfair, if your boundaries were too rigid. And that's the most dangerous moment, not because you're weak, but because you're human. Growth doesn't erase old conditioning overnight, it challenges it. But here's what matters. You notice the doubt now. You don't drown in it. You don't obey it blindly. You observe it with the same awareness that started this entire shift. And that awareness changes everything. Self-doubt loses its grip the moment you stop treating it as truth and start seeing it as residue, leftovers from a dynamic that no longer exists, echoes from a version of you that survived by questioning itself instead of questioning the situation. This is where freedom becomes internal, not dependent on distance, not dependent on silence, but grounded in trust with yourself. You begin to believe your own experience again. You remember that confusion was never your natural state. It was introduced, and now it's dissolving. When self-doubt breaks, manipulation has nowhere to go. No hooks left, no cracks to slip through. Because the strongest defense was never your boundaries alone. It was your willingness to trust yourself again. And once that trust is restored, control doesn't just lose power. It becomes irrelevant. And when control becomes irrelevant, when self-doubt no longer answers the call, something deeply personal surfaces. An old accusation that may have followed you for years. The idea that you were too much, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive, too strong. That lie was never about you. It was a convenient label used when you stopped being easy to manage. You were never too much. You were simply no longer available for misuse. For a long time, your depth was treated lie, a flaw. Your empathy was framed as excess. Your questions were seen as inconvenience. But those qualities were never the problem. They were the very things that made manipulation possible in the first place. When you cared deeply, you tried harder. When you felt strongly, you stayed longer. And when that stopped working for them, the narrative had to change. Calling you too much was an attempt to shrink you back into a shape that fit their comfort, to make you doubt your emotional capacity, to convince you that your needs were unreasonable, your standards unrealistic, your growth threatening. But the moment you trust yourself again, that label falls apart. You begin to see that being too much. For someone who benefits from your self-neglect is not a flaw. It's a boundary. You were never meant to be digestible to those who consume without giving. You were never meant to dim your awareness so someone else could feel in control. This realization doesn't harden you, it frees you. You stop negotiating your depth. You stop apologizing for your awareness. You stop editing yourself to maintain proximity to someone who only valued you when you were smaller. And in that freedom, something shifts quietly but permanently. You no longer measure yourself by their tolerance. You measure yourself by your integrity, by how safe you feel in your own body, by how honest your life becomes when you stop pretending to be less. You are not too much. You are exactly enough for the life that finally honors who you are becoming. And when you stop shrinking, when you stop editing yourself to fit into someone else's comfort, the next step can feel terrifying because it looks like loss from the outside. It looks like distance. It looks like walking away. And for a long time, you may have been taught that leaving is failure, that staying is strength, that endurance equals loyalty. But walking away is not weakness. Walking away is what happens when your self-respect finally outweighs your fear of being misunderstood. It's what happens when you realize that staying in a place that erodes you is not love. It's self-abandonment dressed up as commitment. Strength is not measured by how much you can tolerate. It's measured by how clearly you can choose yourself without cruelty or revenge. You didn't walk away because you couldn't handle it. You walked away because you finally could. You finally had the clarity to see that explaining yourself endlessly to someone committed to misunderstanding you was draining your life force. You finally understood that proximity without respect is not company. Connection, it's confinement. And here's the part that matters most. Walking away doesn't always mean leaving physically. Sometimes it means emotional disengagement. It means no longer fighting battles that require you to betray yourself to win. It means refusing to participate in dynamics that thrive on your exhaustion. This choice doesn't come from anger. It comes from maturity, from knowing that your energy is finite and your peace is sacred, from recognizing that you don't need to prove your worth to someone who only valued your availability. Walking away is not running. It is standing still in your truth and letting what no longer aligns fall away. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The chaos quiets, the fog lifts, and for the first time, your life begins to feel like it belongs to you again. That is not weakness. That is power, finally used in your favor. I'm ready whenever you want to continue with the final keynote. And as you step fully into that space, where walking away is no longer an act of fear, but an act of self-respect, you discover something even more profound. Your healing becomes your freedom. It's not a freedom that depends on anyone else's recognition, apology, or change. It is the kind of freedom that rises quietly, steadily, and irrevocably from the choices you make to honor yourself. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It isn't about excusing their actions or pretending the manipulation never existed. Healing is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were ceded to their control. It's about trusting your instincts again, believing your voice again, and allowing your heart to feel without guilt. And the more you heal, the less space there is for manipulation to exist. You become untouchable, not because you are invincible, but because you are grounded. This freedom is tangible. It shows up in the clarity of your decisions, in the steadiness of your emotions, in the absence of need to justify your boundaries. You stop reacting to every ping of guilt, every echo of their expectations. Instead, you respond from a place of centered awareness, and in doing so, you create a life that cannot be shaken by those who once sought to shake you. And here is the most powerful truth: freedom is the one thing manipulation cannot survive. It cannot twist, distort, or control what no longer belongs to its narrative. Your healing becomes a shield, your clarity a barrier, and your peace a testament to the fact that you are no longer negotiable. So, when you feel the pull to explain, to defend, to shrink yourself again, remember this: every step you take toward healing is a step away from control. Every moment you choose yourself is a victory. And in the quiet triumph of that freedom, you realize the most important lesson of all. Your life, your heart, and your spirit are yours to protect, and no one can ever take that from you. And now, as we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to pause for a moment and feel the weight of what we've uncovered. Every recognition, every boundary, every act of choosing yourself over someone else's need for control has brought you closer to a truth that cannot be taken from you. You have seen how manipulation works, how silence, doubt, and subtle attacks can pull at even the strongest hearts, but you have also seen the power that lies in awareness, strength, and self respect. The journey isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about reclaiming your own life. It's about walking through the fear, the doubt, and the temptation to shrink and stepping into a version of yourself that is unshakable, unwavering, and unapologetically whole. And the most beautiful part? That version of you doesn't need anyone else's validation to exist. It doesn't need permission to shine. It doesn't negotiate its worth. Imagine standing in a space where your heart is free, your mind is clear, and your spirit is unchained. Imagine no longer being pulled into drama, no longer being tempted to explain, justify, or shrink. Imagine your growth radiating quietly, irresistibly, and undeniably, showing the world exactly who you are. That is freedom. That is power. That is living beyond manipulation, beyond fear, beyond anyone else's control. And if there is one thing I want you to remember as this video ends, let it be this: your life belongs to you. Your peace belongs to you. Your heart belongs to you. Every boundary you set, every step you take toward healing, every moment you choose yourself is proof that manipulation cannot survive in the presence of someone who knows their worth. So hold your head high, trust your journey, and step into the life you were always meant to live, boldly, freely, and without apology. Your story is not over. In fact, it's only just beginning.